And welcome to Season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring Unheard, the podcast from the hit Vice TV series that plumbs the depths of hours and hours and hours of Dark Side interview archives with some of the most heralded, unheralded, loved, hated figures in the history of professional wrestling. These are never before heard bits of insight, outtakes that we're going to be presenting to you, all, of course, heading into the premiere of Dark Side of the Ring Season 6, which takes place on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Vice TV. So there's so much to get into, and we're really looking forward to helping prepare you for some of these forthcoming episodes. I'm Jack Encarnacio, and this is JP Sorrow from the Lapsed Fan Wrestling Podcast. And, of course, we're joined by our partner in crime here, Evan Husney, co-creator and executive producer of Dark Side of the Ring. And coming up next, or at least the first episode of the season, will be on the 1998 Hell in a Cell match, in which Mick Foley, a.k.a. Mankind, Cactus Jack, took a dive off the top of the cage in Pittsburgh in sacrifice to his art that we'll never forget. It's a huge, huge moment for any wrestling fan that saw it at the time when WWF was really starting to accelerate in popularity. JP, remembrances on this match. I mean, there's a reason it's remembered.
Yeah, I mean, it's got two of the most legendary bumps of all time, with Foley going, from the top of the cage to the floor and then going through the cage accidentally. And, I didn't actually see that one live. I didn't see this match live. I didn't get it on pay-per-view. I watched it months later. But what's always alarmed me about it, I mean, it's one thing, you're watching it as a fan and you're watching it on TV and the guy goes over. But the reaction of the fans always, it does not sit well with me, because they're like happy. They're thrilled about this. It's like this guy could have died, but they're thrilled with it. And it almost makes me feel like they would have been okay if he had died.
Right.
That's the part that just kind of, especially when we watched it on our show, when we did that episode, it was like, there's just something that just does hit me in a weird way at the reaction.
Well, that's a big part of the heart of what you got into. You've had Mick on so many episodes of Dark Side over the years. FMW, talking about the deathmatch scene that he came into WWF from, Chris Candido, who he was acquainted with over the years, Abdul the Butcher, so many others he's commented on. But here you really wanted to sit down with Mick and look at what JP's talking about, this sort of theater that he found himself known for.
Exactly. We're huge fans of Mick. He was probably the first, major wrestling star that, legitimized us in a lot of ways.
Sure.
He was an early adopter into what we were trying to do, which was amazing. And I've always been fascinated with the Hell in the Cell match in particular. I mean, it changed my life when I saw it live on pay-per-view when I was a kid. And it was this exhilarating, inexplicable, dangerous, thrilling, upsetting moment in wrestling, but also this thing where it was so cinematic. Like, the stakes of it were so high. It felt like there had never been a wrestling match where the stakes were higher, because it's like you said, this guy might die during it, but yet he keeps being resilient. That moment where he's on the stretcher and then he emerges to climb the cage, a second time is just, it gives me chills even to this day. And it's just this amazing thing. So anyway, we always wanted to collaborate with Mick on an episode of Dark Side, and I'm so glad we were able to make it work and really focus just mainly on that match. Yeah. Because I think his career, I mean, that is the match, right? That's the match everyone remembers. And I think it's sort of a microcosm of his whole career in terms of his philosophy. What I also really appreciate about Mick is his dedication to wrestling and how far he takes it, and his art. He approaches wrestling as it's his art form. It's a theater of pain style of art. It's a self-sacrifice, self-harm, style of performance art. But I think that's kind of the route we wanted to examine in him, is more kind of like the psychological approach that he brings to wrestling and the stakes that go with that. I mean, his family is along for that ride, which
you don't think about them too,
In death matches in Japan, you go to Japan, you get great steaks there.
Yeah. From what I understand.
Steaks,
Kobe as well.
Kobe, yeah.
I mean, this Hell in the Cell match was like one of the few times where I'm watching it on pay-per-view, and people knew back then, leave me alone on pay-per-view night.
Right.
My friends had to call me when he came off the top of the cage. Like, my phone rang. That's how insane it was.
It was so nuts. It was just, we'd never seen anything like that.
Are you watching this?
Yeah, are you watching this? It was unbelievable. And to your point earlier, just about the audience, that is also the dark side, if you will, to this whole thing, where
if the audience didn't want him to do it, he wouldn't do it.
No, there's that, but it's also you're now raising the bar to that metric, and that's going to create this sort of wave of expectation
That's
with
right.
an audience, and how are you going to top yourself? And this is now our new expectation going into a Mick Foley match. And as you see in our episode that's coming up next week, is we really examine how that's a very slippery, dangerous slope for a performer to get into. So, but anyway,
we're excited to get into some of these clips. And one of the things he talks about on the episode, and as it turns out, deep in your archives, having sat with you so many times, is the nature of why he does it, and this idea that he's, he thinks that as self-mutilating as it appears to be, it's an act of trying to feel loved by somebody, be it a wrestling fan, it's not necessarily an exercise in repulsing people. It's an exercise in being accepted and acknowledged for doing something, even if it's crazy and wild. So one of the episodes that he sat for you guys for was your history of FMW, which was Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. It was a Japanese sort of deathmatch promotion. He also got involved with the IWA, which was a competing group that was having death matches. And these were famous in that they introduced barbed wire, C4 explosives, thumbtacks. I mean, people were getting burned, people were being lacerated, people were being concussed. And it was just a way to draw attention and draw insight, draw the public in. And here he talks to you guys about that.
Unfortunately, it's kind of the perfect canvas, for Mick to fully express
Just take a look at him.
the limits.
Is this Santa, Mick?
Oh yeah, this is before we get into this, this is from season 3's FMW episode, and he was preparing because post wrestling after he retired, he dedicated himself to becoming Santa Claus every year. As a way to still connect with people.
He's a huge Christmas guy.
Yeah, he's a huge Christmas fan.
So he didn't really change careers then. He went from one fake thing to
Don't tell
sorry,
them. Don't tell the kids.
No, sorry, any kids watching.
No, but it's so endearing that Mick is obviously so kind to so many people, and it fits his personality so well for him to be Santa as well as the deathmatch, the hardcore icon.
So here he talks about facing the trappings of the barbed wire, the fire, and really the expectations of this scene that is becoming his trademark.
Right.
When I got back from my first tour from IWA Japan and I went to the doctor, he was stunned. He said he'd only heard about this in prison breaks. It was just, it wasn't even the severity of the two, it was just the sheer number of lacerations, even the ones.
Just to stop it here for a second, I also was so always curious. What do the doctors think?
Yes.
When these guys show up, and they don't know wrestling. What do they think?
And even if they do, they don't know the wrestling where you're falling into barbed wire.
Yeah, right.
And
Exactly.
Flesh is being peeled off. You're like an orange.
Yeah, exactly.
Of lacerations, even the ones that were superficial, were just so numerous. Who does this? Who does it? And I would say at the time, I'm doing this because I have children and a mortgage. But then there would be a camera shot and you'd see the look in my eyes and I'd be like, ooh, there was part of me that did not dislike being there.
That's right. That's right.
You can do it for the paycheck, but you don't excel in it unless there's part of you that absolutely wants to be there.
And what does the doctor say? Is he like, well, where'd you get this from? Or did he know you at that point?
He likes that question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's what? Because he's seen that look
Yeah.
in their eyes of concern and judgment.
A doctor didn't know me well enough to understand what made me tick. There's man against man against himself, and now you enter man against the wire.
That is an incredible line. I think we used that in the episode, but yeah, man against barbed wire. Man against the wire. Love it.
Man against flames. You have all these other elements where you're making a living, you're putting on a show, you're doing what you love, but you're also facing fear on a nightly basis. You're facing the wire, you're facing that fear, you're facing explosives, you're facing flames, and you have to tackle it. And you have to earn their respect. If you don't earn their respect, they don't bring you back, or you're on a lower position on that card. If you want to excel, you're doing it on their terms, and you have to embrace it wholeheartedly. I sound like a psycho now, right?
That's the moment. Jake.
That's great.
Because he's as he hears himself telling it, it's like, God, yeah. How did they put me in a headspace where I was, not only doing this to myself, but taking it as a point of pride.
I mean, it's you know, you can watch him, and it's great that he's kind of come away from it and he's laughing about it. But I don't know if, like, I can't fathom having that mentality, having the idea that, okay, you know what? I mean, like you said, yes, he's doing it for a mortgage for his kids, but he's also doing it because he likes it.
Oh, of course.
He enjoys this shit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things he could do to pay the mortgage.
Yeah, right.
One thing you'll see in the season 6 premiere episode with Mick is, you know, when he was young and he was, you know, had, you know, friends and getting into college and school and things, he found out early on that by being kind of gross and weird and, you know, performative, he could get reactions out of people.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's where it started with him, where maybe he wasn't able to endear himself to other people in a conventional way.
Yeah.
But by being over the top and wacky and weird and wild, he could provoke a response, and that he found as a way to, you know, establish a deep connection with people.
I can identify with that a little bit. I mean, I had a similar thing when I was in 6th grade, where a friend of mine who was also a wrestling fan, he and I we'd start our wrestling fights in school, in the classroom, and all of a sudden it got attention of the cool kids.
There you
and
go.
It's like we're now but we had to get more violent and more violent to the point where
There you go.
my friend actually was so pissed at me, he punched me in the face twice.
Yeah.
Like literally decked me twice. And
Yeah.
I was like, didn't even realize it had happened. I can identify with it, I guess. And
Yeah,
a little-
disturbingly. Well,
disturbingly.
we're gonna get more into that
Yeah.
psyche of it all. But before we move off of the death match subject, Mick also had a great insight into sort of sizing up the props that this wrestling league had brought, particularly the explosives, which were a novel concept in wrestling at the time. There had been some explosions during wrestling matches, but not landing on the bombs.
Well, let's be clear too. This is FMW, right? This is the Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling in Japan, where they were infamous for their cinematic set pieces of, you know, as you said earlier, using explosions, electrified barbed wire cages. You know, they would go so far as to have wrestlers they'd have like a ring in the middle of a body of water, and then have wrestlers ride out little tiny boats out into the ring, and the pool was supposed to be electrified. These guys were into those gimmicks, and they were into making it seem like you're watching an action film, you know, and I always appreciated it. But it's another thing, because you don't think as a fan what really goes into this, like the moments before and sort of the pre-production of it. And this clip, I think, kind of exemplifies that.
Some talk about his mentor, Terry Funk, sizing up. This is for the IWA promotion, the King of the Deathmatch tournament, which wrestling fans who became acquainted to Mick Foley on WWF television in 1997 will remember him sitting down with the announcer Jim Ross, and they're showing these deathmatch clips from his past. And he's sort of like a tortured soul as a result of his past. And so these things got national. They were like tape trading secrets for a couple of years, but this thing was broadcast out nationally, these moments. So here's Mick talking with the crazy Terry Funk, his mentor, who's just an all-time legend, and who we featured last time on Unheard in our first season, who you were able to sit down with before he passed away.
And he's responsible for a lot of this.
Yeah, he's even nuttier than Mick.
Yeah.
He did it 30 years after he had become the top guy in wrestling, or 20 years after. So here's Mick talking about sizing up the explosives that both of them are going to have to.
And look how happy he is about that.
That is not... He's like so happy he's going to talk about blowing himself up.
That's the face I make when I get asked about burning my flesh off.
It's amazing. All right, here we go.
From what I told, FMW used movie people, motion picture props, and we used demolitions. So we used a demolition expert. So I'm not saying their C4 wasn't real. I'm just saying ours.
He's saying there, just quickly, he's saying FMW, which you mentioned, used special effects movie people to create these big dramatic explosions that wouldn't necessarily harm the wrestlers. IWA brings in people that blow things up for demolition purposes, like tearing down a building. And so that's the explosives he's dealing with. A lot of go, not as much show.
Right.
Oh, my God.
Here we go.
For wasn't real. I'm just saying ours was even worse. So that when I landed on that explosion, you know, you're essentially supposed to make something look worse than it is. And in that case, I was hurt so badly, I just hopped up like, boom! Like I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it when they detonated the explosives in the outfield earlier that afternoon before the fans came in. There was an explosive on each side of the barbed wire board. The barbed wire board, a board laced with barbed wire, not enough for this show. So we've got two explosives. Like And now they detonate them, and it sounds like this massive explosion echoing through a canyon. And my voice rose an octave. I go, no, there's no way. There's no way. And then I hear Terry go, that looks good, but I think we need one more in the middle. And I said, Terry, if there are explosions on both sides and one in the middle, where are we going to land? And he looked at me and goes, it'll be fine, Cactus. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine. It was not fine. Both of us needed attention because of those explosions. It was insane.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. In a business that has so much, allusion to it.
Yeah.
This is like, you're watching a guy fall on something that just blew up.
FMW, fuck my world.
Well, I should say too, for anyone who has never seen footage of this, either check out our FMW episode from season 3, or I'm sure YouTube's has all the great moments from those. But when you see it, it is a man, a stunt performer, a wrestler in this case, not a stunt performer, a wrestler who's literally lying on top of a massive explosion. And it's just a miracle that these guys, survived all of these spots. It's crazy.
For me, I didn't really, we've watched a lot of extreme stuff when doing the Lapsed Fan, but I never caught it. Like I was not into like tape trading or anything like that in the 90s. I just watched what was on TV. I watched WWE, I watched WCW. I didn't even watch ECW. And so I don't have any nostalgia for that kind of stuff. So it's weird. Like when we watch it, and I'm in my 40s now, and we're watching this, like we watch even just ECW, which is in a way tamer than some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like mortifying to me. Like it's horrifying to me.
Yeah.
Because I never watched it. And so it's like, geez.
I remember in the late 90s when I first got caught wind of all this stuff that was happening over in Japan with FMW and the explosions, there was like a little crude animated GIF on like some GeoCities website.
That's all you needed.
Of like the ring exploding.
Yes.
And I'm like, what the is that?
Yes.
Like, did everyone die in the auditorium, and, like in the stadium? It's so reckless and crazy, but
that's why they were doing it.
Exactly.
That was a way for these smaller groups to get coverage
in
the Japanese wrestling magazines, which were a huge outlet for promotion at the time. So if you could put on the cover of a wrestling magazine a bloody wrestler with explosives behind him and scars up and down his body,
sign me up.
That's a way to pull people in without having to have the huge exposure the big wrestling leagues in Japan had.
Yeah, and just also one other thing too. It's like I also going back and watching those FMW matches now, even though he's talking about IWA.
Yeah.
But specifically FMW, like the way that those matches are filmed. Yes, they're using movie props and everything, but also just the way that company produced its shows. It looked so amazing. It looked like you were watching an action film too, and I really appreciate that from a production standpoint. Sure. But anyway, I digress.
No, that's good stuff. So one other burning question, pardon the pun, that people always have about being in these kind of matches, besides what did the doctor say, what did it feel like to get on that plane after you had taken this much damage? And there's a lot more to that than even I would have appreciated when you guys were able to ask Mick that very question. You got to fly home after something like this. So if you can present the clip of him responding to this, we're looking at clip 5 here.
Yeah.
This is what it's like for Mick Foley to get on a plane after taking the kind of trauma we were just discussing.
Yeah, and to be clear, a 13-hour flight back
from
Japan. Here we go.
I got called up by the airline to the front desk. They gave me a business class ticket, first business class ticket I'd ever had in my life. I sat down next to this poor woman who just looked terrified.
Yes,
and
that's right.
She got up because I smelled, right? Like, I had all these stitches. So you can't take a shower. So it's like burnt hair, charred flesh.
He's laughing about it.
Oh, that's great.
About it.
I love that. So this is great because it's like, obviously, this. I'm guessing, it's been many years since this interview, but I'm guessing our sound guy that we hired locally, right, for this. And this is a great phenomenon with our show because we always hire the sound people locally.
Sure.
They don't know what the hell they're stepping into. They don't know who we're interviewing or what this is all about. And so it does happen on occasion where the stories out of these guys' mouths are so unbelievable that, you will bust a sound guy, which is kind of a cardinal sin in the sound game, right?
Of course, of course. But you got to imagine, too. I would imagine, this look on his face, like he's he's hoping for that. He's hoping that
That's the reaction.
he's hoping that somebody here is not a wrestling fan,
Yep.
and that when they hear this story, they're gonna
Tell it.
yeah.
Look at how happy he is
Look
about
at that. Like, he's fucking thrilled.
Such a great moment.
And the Christmas lights behind.
And
him,
again,
too.
it's something that you can't use in the episode, but it's like that's what we're here for.
Right.
Just so you know,
Right.
So something like this can see the light of day.
Yeah.
We should have in hindsight, but here
No,
it
I think
is
you made
now.
the right decision.
All right, so now we're here.
The sound guy's laughing. The cameraman's laughing.
God.
Yeah, it was this weird potpourri. It was so crazy, right?
Potpourri.
And the last thing I think of is him smelling like potpourri.
Well, you think about charred flesh, but you don't think about the fact that he didn't shower.
I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Think of the stink.
Right.
Think of the
Oh.
stink, y'all. Okay, here we go.
It looks almost like I'm wearing makeup. Is my eyes all swollen, and I'm discolored. I got hues of purple and pinks coming in. My head is wrapped up. I got more gauze than Boris Karloff in the original Universal Mummy movie.
I've always wondered this too. Like, again, something out of sight, out of mind for fans. This idea of, okay, they do this big crazy match, right? Blood and guts, explosions, lacerations, everything he just said. And then what happens next after the next day? What's the 24 hours later? And so this is amazing because how does the rest of the world, like, what do they assume you've been through? Like a street fight with a dozen people?
I always wonder too, like you get some of the wrestlers who have these completely awful haircuts for their characters.
I know.
They've got to go to the
I know.
supermarket someday looking like this.
Well,
Him, like he's got to go to the supermarket burnt and like just, God.
All right. Let's get back to it here.
And this poor lady is just terrified.
13-hour flight.
13-hour flight. She gets up about 30 minutes into the flight, and I realize half an hour passes. I don't see her. And I look in the back, and she's just like huddled up against the window seat about halfway. Her hands like almost in the form of a prayer. And I thought to myself, she gave up her business class seat to get away from me? And I just thought, that is cool. Like when you have that type of power, that was cool.
See, that's again speaking to what we're saying about the reaction. It's wrestling is the art form of getting reactions right from people. Stand up is similar in that way, and acting and for him,
Stripping too, yes.
No, they say stand-up comedy and stripping are the two most common things to a wrestler.
Gee, wow,
Yeah, I believe
crazy.
that.
It's probably a little bit. It's probably the combination of both. But anyway, him.
Porn.
Yeah, him. Looking for this reaction. And as I said in the episode you'll see next week, that was like a very foundational moment for him, was the power of the reaction, the power he had getting reactions out of people. And that doesn't just mean, under the lights, in the ring, and all that stuff. That can mean just on the street, on a plane.
Yeah, that's the difference. Like, most of us would be mortified that we did that to someone on the plane.
Right.
That they saw us as so unsavory.
Yeah.
He takes it as a point of pride that someone literally left first class. They would rather downgrade the ticket they paid for than be anywhere near this
and that takes a lot.
Halloween lawn decoration.
Too bad you couldn't find that woman. I'd be wondering how traumatized she was after that experience.
Oh my God.
But what's great here is Mick realizes, because he's such a good storyteller,
Yeah.
there's more to it that really brings it home.
Yeah, and he's great like that. He offering it all. It's so generous in that way.
Oh my God, that's amazing! Wow.
Can I add one little story?
Please.
My dad picks me up at JFK and drives me to the little house we were renting. I had two small children at the time, and my wife keeps, oh God, what was it, a smoking flight? Was somebody sitting next to me? Was somebody smoking? Like, she's really carrying on. And then when my dad leaves, she's like, really, Mick, you smell terrible. What was going on? I was like, it's me. And I take off
It's me.
my outer shirt, and there's just skin falling off my body.
Oh.
Yeah. It was so insane. And I wrestled 2 days later.
Of course.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's no There's no recuperation.
No.
Yeah, we always say on the Lapsed Fan, like, people think because wrestling is fake that it doesn't hurt. And
Right.
in fact, because it's fake, it hurts 10 times worse
Yeah,
than anything
right.
else you
Exactly.
could do, because
Right.
you're constantly doing these things to raise the not the expectation, but to just shock the audience
Right.
into being like, how how is that possible?
Right,
This is
right.
all a put on.
Right.
And so Mick stands as a testament to how far you can take that, how successful you can be with that. But I don't want to discount something about Mick Foley, one of the best mic men in the history of the
Yes.
business.
Oh,
This guy is not just someone who mutilates his physicality
Exactly.
to get attention. There have been a lot of people in the business that have tried to do that, and no one even remembers their name. But this guy, as these clips demonstrate, Evan, he can get in front of a camera and he can penetrate that camera and he can get a story across.
Yes.
It's off the top of his head. He's one of the best.
well, you mentioned earlier that interview he did with JR on WWF television 97?
7, yeah.
97, 98?
97, yeah.
It's incredible. I urge everyone to go back and watch this.
Great stuff.
Mick is in Mankind character, and just again his commitment, the method acting, if you will, and how far he took what is on paper a pretty ridiculous, over the top character, but found a way to ground it
Yeah.
in a way that actually seemed genuinely disturbing, not for laughs, or hokey wrestling shit.
Yeah.
Like he took it seriously.
He-
And
he found a way to come from a place where this kind of violence didn't come off as gratuitous. It came off as in keeping with the character that he had gotten across to the audience.
That is one thing. Yeah. His I mean, if you remember the whole initial Mankind character from 96, it was about self-mutilation. It
Yep.
was
Yeah.
about
ripping his own hair out.
ripping his hair out and rocking himself in the corner, in a disturbing way.
yeah.
Like all that stuff. And so it didn't come across as gratuitous. It came across as very, very honest to the character.
As what would happen if you unleashed a guy with this
Right.
background into a pro wrestling arena. Same thing Cactus Jack, too, which predated
Right.
Mankind.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole thing about Mick and why he's so special is even at his own personal risk, he's bringing in so much believability
Totally.
and credibility to, well, this might be real, from an outsider perspective. Like maybe everything else they're doing in the wrestling show is fake, but he's real, and he's blurring those lines, and that draws money, and he's one of the guys, whether you judge his performance art or not, or how he goes about it, but he always did genuinely create more interest in wrestling.
Sure.
And it led to a lot of success. But obviously there's a darker side to that and the consequences of that, right?
Literally. Yeah. Well, he knows how to meet the moment. He knows how to put himself at this kind of risk at a moment where people will remember it, recall it, where it feels like it's taking place at a significant moment. There have been people that have taken crazier risks in wrestling than Mick Foley, and you don't remember them.
Well, we've talked about too on the Laps Fan how important he is to so many people's careers because of what he's willing to do
So
to
true.
put over other people. I mean, look, Stone Cold, Triple H, and The Rock, right there, three of the greatest.
Who owe everything.
Everything.
The Undertaker,
Undertaker,
who was already
Totally.
way over before this Hell in a
Yep.
Cell match.
Yep.
These guys owe everything to
Yep.
what Mick was willing to do to
Yep.
himself to make them look like next level killers.
Yep.
And he had great matches with Sean too. I mean,
Oh,
Sean,
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So we're going to get more into that aspect of this, the psychological need that this kind of a style filled for Mick. And I wouldn't expect this, but he was kind of kindred spirits with another subject of a past Dark Side episode, Luna Vachon, who of course also met an untimely demise and had a very, let's say, unique behind the scenes personality.
Oh yeah.
And but he sat to talk to you guys about Luna, and he even gives us a little imitation of her trademark raspy voice here in the beginning of this clip. But he talks about why he thinks, when he looks at Luna, he sees a lot in why he behaved the way he did, because he's someone that knows what it's like to feel
Yeah.
to feel like you repulse others.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're somebody that has that effect on people, all with the intention of being accepted in an odd way, and that's just your vessel to do it. So let's take a look at this clip here where he talks about Luna.
This is clip 1, right?
Yeah, we're looking at clip 2 for this one.
Oh, clip 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this will be him starting off with a bit of a attempt to do Luna's voice.
I think everyone can do an impression. Probably not a good. Hello, Noel. How are you today?
Noelle is his daughter, I think,
Yes.
who was in the room during the interview.
Oh, that makes sense.
Oh, wow.
yeah.
That's funny.
And you wonder why people would flee. I mean, when I was Mankind, I wondered sometimes why the Make-A-Wish children backstage would be terrified, and people are like, you portray a terrifying character.
Let's just explain that for 1 second. Wrestlers have a long history of doing a lot of charitable events for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. But typically you're getting like the main baby faces to interact with the kids, right?
Who would make a wish for mankind?
Well, I think they just bring the kids backstage
all
and
right.
whoever's available.
Oh,
I think
God.
that's how it
Right,
goes.
yeah,
yeah.
bring me. Yeah, and so it's like
Dwayne Gill's available.
is Gilbert available? No, but it's you know, usually a John Cena.
Yeah, right.
You know, give me some other examples. The
Well,
Rock.
squeaky clean baby face.
Yeah,
Hogan,
squeaky clean.
Bret Hart.
Yeah,
Hogan.
right. And so mankind with the disfigured face and the very terrifying
Absolutely.
leather horrifying mask. He's probably wearing that. And disturbing these kids and doing more harm than good. So here, let's.
Oh my God!
Just wanted to contextualize it.
That's so funny. The Make-A-Wish kids were scared of you?
Yeah, I would have to be asked to just, please. I know you're trying to make their day. They weren't there specifically to see me, but I always wanted to try to, make their day even more special. It turns out some of the time I wasn't doing that. I was making it a little.
That's hilarious.
It is often the case that the better the bad guy, the nicer they are. Especially if you break in as a heel, you learn humility.
So there you hear Mick kind of,
I can hear that. I can believe that.
yeah, he's talking about how tough it is to square wanting to be liked in real life with actually having to be a disturbing, crazy man on television. You would think that they're at odds with each other, but
Right.
they're actually not. And in this clip here, we have clip 2 here. He talks about what he saw in common with Luna, who was, as mentioned, kind of a wild, off-the-wall character that if you were to encounter her as a 6-year-old in real life, you'd kind of...
Yeah, I mean, she kind of, for those who don't know, I mean, she looked kind of like something straight out of like an '80s metal video.
yes.
With
She was
this,
horrifying.
yeah, and she spoke in that voice, and she was very, yeah. It's an amazing kind of '80s movie character, but freaky for a kid, and I think I love hearing how he can relate. To
Yes. Yeah.
Clip 2.
Oh, she's
That's
like she was out of Escape from New York.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
right.
another way to contextualize it for
right.
people, yeah.
There you go.
So I think she struggled with that. The fact that people were terrified of her. She was just, like a lot of us, and especially in the wrestling business, looking to be loved deep down, looking to be accepted. I know to this day, like I still need that. And Luna did as well. We all deep down want it. I mean, that's the reason we get into a business and put our bodies on the line to earn the approval of total strangers in fantasy warfare. Like, that's part of what we yearn for. Even in these days, like if I do an appearance, like everyone has to have a great experience. It's a point of personal pride. You want to see the smiles on the faces. You want to make people happy. When you're a bad guy, you want to make them sad, but deep down, you're looking for some kind of approval, I think.
I don't know, JP. It makes some sense that someone's looking for approval with he doesn't look like an Adonis. He doesn't look like a...
No, and I mean, look, I think especially in the 80s and 90s, the wrestling world was like an island of misfit toys, easily, and everyone wants to be loved. And I can sympathize with that. I can identify with that. I just and I don't even have an issue. Like any other wrestler taking the bumps, doing the high flying moves. It's like I've gotten in the ring twice in my life.
Yeah.
Like I can appreciate the idea of wanting to do that and do it well enough so that people do react. And I get that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just taking that extra step to the extremely violent, risky. You got a family. I don't know if jumping off a 20-foot ladder to the floor on your back is a good idea.
Well, there is some, aspect to it, that is obviously appealing to him, but is a drive to him and to outdo himself. And Mick, more than anybody, even when we do interviews with him, sometimes he'll ask, like, was that good enough?
Yeah.
Is that something that was good enough? And he's very sensitive to making sure, the fans got their money's worth, that people walk away and they felt like it was worth it to sit there and to watch this performance. Meanwhile, all of us are like, are you fucking kidding me? That
Right.
was like the most insane
Right.
thing I've ever seen.
Right.
Or in the case of his interviews, that was incredible. You know, he's a great storyteller, super articulate, and very thoughtful with his time. So he does have that insecurity or a side to him that he's unsure of if it's good enough.
You can almost start to see why he'd end up in this position of doing this to himself.
Right.
Because there's that constant doubt that
Doubt,
he's,
self-doubt.
he's worthy of your attention
Yes.
and time.
And you know, that does play into, again, the episode next week that everyone will see is like, you know, the gatekeepers, the Vince McMahons of the world
Right.
didn't want him, you
Right.
know, in on the main roster, and he wasn't your prototypical out of the box, you know, wrestler looking guy.
Yep.
Yep.
And so he really had to overcompensate. And you hear the story a lot in wrestling. You know, when it's not what the promoter wants, they have to overcompensate in another, sometimes more dangerous way.
I know, and I get that's I guess probably my biggest issue with the wrestling business is that it's not, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, any business, you know, when entertainment wise, you know,
Yeah,
it's all
acting
about
is like that too.
physicality. Of course, it's all about physicality. You know, I'm not going to be the next Tom Cruise anytime soon. You know, like, but like at the same time, you know, it puts so much pressure on a Mick Foley to have to do that, and it's a shame that the business really forces that on people. But it, you know,
It is also a mixture of, going back to our first point with this show, is earlier we made, is that I think it is a mixture of the promoter and the vision of the promoter and what they want, but also the audience, because that's the intangible, organic sort of thing that everyone's, you know, paying attention to that reaction, and then they're going with it, and that could be a slippery slope. And I think it's a mixture of those two elements.
Yeah.
You know,
It's weird because wrestling tells itself that they can force the people to want whatever they want because they're that good at manipulation.
Right.
Yet at the same time, they can also wipe their hands of it and say that's what the people want.
Yeah,
So,
right,
you know,
right,
It's funny how
right.
they can have it
Right.
both ways.
exactly.
One of
So
the
true.
insights that you guys picked up from him over the course of interviewing him that I thought was fascinating was when he first started his career, he would be taking these high trauma, high blunt force impact bumps. He'd fall off the apron and land on the concrete. He'd jump off the top and land on the floor. He'd have wrestlers like just fall like Vader, full weight onto his body.
Yep.
And it wasn't about cuts. It wasn't about burns. It
Yeah.
wasn't about that. It wasn't about thumbtacks sticking out of his flesh. And he was actually saying to you guys, like, that's actually preferable to the skeletal trauma. Of course, he threw that out the window when he jumped off the cage. He put it all together in that one, didn't he?
Yeah, that's a
Thumbtacks and jumping.
amalgamation of it all.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to think about when you talk about his early career and the things he felt he had to do. It was these, without all these toys at his disposal, it was just throwing yourself on a concrete floor in
So
a way
wait,
that the next guy wasn't willing to do.
he preferred the
cuts.
The cut. Jesus.
Yeah, because it didn't, you know, you didn't have
Yeah,
the
because
superficial
broken
right.
bones. You
Yeah,
know.
Right.
absolutely. And this was the type of thing where when you go back into like early 90s, early 90s WCW with Cactus Jack, and you would see nothing like that. You had never seen a guy
Oh yeah. Right.
basically fall off the top turnbuckle onto the concrete floor. You know, that's like what, 7 feet in the air? or 8
Whatever
feet
it
in the air,
is. It's
whatever
just
the
a splat.
Yeah.
It's a splat of a body, full weight, just dead weight hitting concrete. And of course, it echoes throughout the whole auditorium.
And everyone thinks they know how they fall, and then
yeah,
he does that. And
exactly.
Well, and even then, it's like it doesn't even matter. Like, you know, you're taught to how to
distribute the weight.
distribute the weight.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah. Distribute the
There's no-
impact of it, but
There's no shortcut
still
there.
you're jumping off of
Yeah.
10, 15 feet, whatever
No.
it is. Like, no.
Of course, and the fact that was so that was like anomalous to anything you'd see on that card at the time.
Right.
And he's like, you know, second or third match. And so it creates this whole thing where, like, you know, the audience that goes home that night that's the thing they're going to remember is, whoa, that guy might have messed that up, or that was some real ass shit, you know?
Yeah, I don't know how he did it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the great things he talked to you guys about when he sat for your episode on Chris Candido, who was another wrestler who met an untimely demise and struggled mightily with painkillers and muscle relaxers in the tail end of his life, was this idea that if there's ever been a pro wrestler ever who should have had a drug problem as it regards painkillers,
Oh yeah.
should have been Mick Foley.
Yeah.
I mean, the pain that he's put himself through early in those days of falling off aprons and later in those days of falling on barbed wire. And so here in this clip, you guys were able to talk to Mick about why he didn't fall into that trap of prescription drug abuse.
which is miraculous.
It really is. Because
Uh,
you would think that he would be the guy
Oh, absolutely.
that would have all the excuse in the world
Right.
to
Yeah.
take a
Right.
little too many pills. We're going to be talking here about, if you're not familiar with a muscle relaxer called somas, which were a scourge in the wrestling business, particularly in the 90s,
man.
because they set you so at ease when combined with alcohol, it could be deadly.
Yeah, and everybody knows who knows wrestling that there was this epidemic of
Yep.
premature deaths related to the abuse of painkillers and muscle relaxers and mixing the booze or whatever.
Slowing you down to the point your heart
Yeah,
just stops.
Oh,
Right,
God.
right. And so obviously that was a huge topic of the Chris Candido episode that we did in season 4, and here Mick is relating it again to himself. Here we go.
Well, when you work a physical style, like I did, like Chris did, there's a price to be paid. And you pay that price in discomfort or sometimes intense pain. And if you hear that there's something that will not only take that pain away, but make you feel great, that's quite a temptation. And a lot of times it's a necessity. In my own case, I kept pushing the definition of severe pain further and further out to the point where I didn't take a single thing for the first 9 years of my career. As soon as I took my first pill for a bad shoulder bruise in 1994, I got it, I could understand it, and I avoided the trap. But it's so easy to fall into. I know what somas are because I've taken a soma. Two somas in different years.
Scratch that too.
Right.
And they were debilitating to the point where I had to tell my wife, look, I can't drive. I can't drive my son to basketball practice. And I was a 300-pound man who was knocked for a loop by one soma on 2 occasions. So the idea that guys would be taking 6 or 7 at a time, or that people might be taking 50 Vicodins in a day was just
50 Vicodins in a day. I mean, that must be a real number.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, we just did an episode of our spin-off show Under the Cinema. We talked about Kurt Angle
Yeah.
and all the
right.
painkillers
The
he
period
was
he
taking.
was
When he was
going through
taking
it.
like 50 to 100 pills a day, something like that. It was. I was mind blowing. Like the fact that he's not dead just on
Yeah,
one day of that
is crazy.
Is
Yeah,
crazy.
He's very lucky. All right, here, let's continue this.
it just seemed impossible to me, but yet it was done. Like the prongs of this, this terrible addiction, they're multifaceted in that you can really use it to relieve physical pain, but also the euphoric feeling that comes along with the painkillers is a way that the men and women escape the emotional pain that pro wrestling can sometimes bring. I've said it's a really good chance that you will be hurt physically pretty badly in professional wrestling, but it's a 100% lock that you will have your heart broken over and over again. And the medication can ease that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an underappreciated
Yep.
aspect to that whole cycle, with wrestlers, and substance abuse and everything. It's because I mean, for the reasons we've talked about, working under a promoter, at any moment your destiny can be altered. You can be passed over, you can lose, you get injured, you lose your spot, and that everything you've worked for and put your body through is out the door, and of course everything else that can lead to, the sort of mental health concerns that go along with this business. And so I think that is underappreciated in terms of, why some of these wrestlers do find themselves going down that path,
Yeah, even if the pain stops physically,
Yeah.
you realize that you got even more out of the heavy abuse of painkillers because it put you at ease and
Right.
calmed your anxiety. And
Right.
leave it up
That
to
too.
it up to Mick to bring that in.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's also, I mean,
Exactly.
it's not solving your problem. It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, of
it's
course.
a quick Band-Aid. And really, when it's done, I mean, this is what he's talking about. Like you become reliant on it and addicted to it. But it's
And a lot of
Yeah.
the guys we lost early were somewhat out of the business, and then you
Right.
stopped hearing from them,
Right.
and then they died of an overdose taking pain meds after they had stopped taking the hard bumps.
And there's also, maybe, there's also the quality of like wrestlers too have these fractured families
Yeah.
because they're on the road,
Yeah.
so many days out of the year. And I think reassimilating back into your family post wrestling or in between, those few days you get with your family, there is a lot of, I think, emotional weight and guilt that's probably
Oh, yeah.
associated with that, and just friction that can arise out of, you putting food on the table, but then not being there for anyone and everything. I'm not trying to read into it too much, but I'm sure that is a factor.
Well, yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Um,
It's you find yourself sacrificing so much more than you ever intended to
Yeah.
for a business that has really no love for you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Or at the very least will never love you back as much as
Right.
you love
Right.
it.
Right, because it's a business.
Right.
And even though, that's the way they treat it, as sort of, dollars and cents, zeros and ones. Not
You're
the-
putting butts in seats.
Yeah,
you know,
it's not all the other X factors of
Right.
what you bring to this and what you're doing in order to improve the gates and the fans and the and all that stuff. So yeah, it's brutal. It's one step more brutal than Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which
Which
is
is because you're in agony physically.
Yeah.
Right.
for so
Right.
often, and one little misstep can compromise your whole trajectory.
And
like
then
you
it's
said.
like, well, that's not going to work. Out.
Yeah,
you know.
amazing. So let's lighten the mood a little bit here on Mick.
Christ.
Well, he puts us here. That's you got to give him. That's his candor that puts us in
Oh,
these
yeah.
kind of
He's-
conversations, man.
if
he would
we-
prefer we talk about it like this.
I
would
know.
imagine.
And if we haven't said it, like the sweetest guy
Yep.
in all of wrestling, literally, he is my favorite wrestler to work with.
Wow.
In the whole history of the series, not just because he's so generous with his time and all the stuff that he brings, in terms of his expertise and his experience to all of our stories, it just elevates it so much. So the fact that we finally got him to be the subject of an episode, which is it took 6 seasons to do that.
Yeah.
He was always, again, he wasn't sure that if you wanted that emphasis, but man, yeah, he's just the best. I can't say anything.
I think
greater
it's safe
than-
to say that he has provided a great service to all
Yes.
mankind.
Yeah.
Well, we listed off those wrestlers that owe everything to him because of what he did to himself to get them over. You know who else owes him a ton? Any wrestler who's ever sold a copy of their book.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Because
He
when
was
he-
the first.
When he came out with "Have a Nice Day" and hit the New York Times bestseller list, all of his little scribblings, everybody else suddenly had a book deal.
I just have to say this, and maybe this is going too long in the weeds, but when we worked with him on the pilot episode of the Bruiser Brody pilot of Dark Side of the Ring, there was a path where he would be our narrator for the whole show. And
Oh, really?
I wish that was the case. I wish we would have been able to work that out. Obviously, Chris is great and does a fantastic job. But the thing about Mick that's so amazing is that he puts so much effort and time and consideration into writing every single voiceover line. He wanted to take over that duty, which was it's great from sharing the workload with
Yeah.
somebody else, but he brought so much because he is a writer and he's so creative and he's so talented at that he brought so much consideration into every single word and how much care he brought to that episode and wanting it to be the best it could be. It's like, just had to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
He has that whole side to him too,
Well, all the tales that he weaved in that book about coming up in the business and who were his road buddies, the people he traveled from town to town with in the car. One of them is the subject of an episode last season on Dark Side of the Ring, the one and only Abdullah the Butcher, who we're going to be looking at much more closely on this season of Unheard as well, because he
I think that was season 4.
sat with you guys. Season 4?
It was
Okay.
season 4, yeah, not 5, yeah.
He sat with you
It's
guys.
hard to keep them all together. But
Yeah, yeah. If you can't do it, then
Yeah, right.
so he talks about, because don't forget, he was with Abdul the Butcher in the early 90s in WCW.
Oh, yes.
There's the famous Chamber of Horrors match
Oh,
that he was a part of, where he was supposed to, just look it up, flip the switch on an electric chair that Abdullah the Butcher had been placed into, because, sometimes wrestling matches end when someone is executed in the middle of the ring, and that's just entertainment.
I think that's fine. I
That's
see no
fine,
problem with that at all.
It's fine.
No problem. It's fine.
Checks out as
Absolutely
fine.
Yes.
but that is technically better, a worked execution than
Yeah.
what Mick would later do. Which
I think the point is you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't go there at all.
we
Yeah,
shouldn't
right
go
there.
there at all.
I get your point.
But
get your point.
the Hell in the Cell match is our modern day crucifixion, one might say. Go on.
But he doesn't have just these heavy recollections of like these deep probing issues of being a wrestler and living that life. He also also just makes funny observations about the people like Abdullah the Butcher that he ran into. And here he takes us in this clip into how Abdullah the Butcher would, let's say, source the weaponry that he would carry. Here's like a prototype of one of his action figures with a little stick hanging out of his hand there.
Is that rolled steel?
Yeah. And so
Is that mozzarella?
most likely, if not a Red Lobster tail.
Smoked cheddar?
So here he talks about, you know, being on the road with Abby and how Abdullah would source the weaponry, okay, be it a fork, be it a spike that he would use to stab his opponent's heads and draw blood.
This
so
is a good little wrestling trivia here for you.
Yeah.
Is this clip 7?
Yeah, we're looking here at clip 7. That's correct.
All right.
So here's Mick Foley on Abby.
Oh, 1 second here.
Yeah, sure. You ever wonder where Abby gets the forks from?
Yes, I do. I do wonder.
All right, so here we go. Let's find out.
Well, having traveled with Abdullah, I will tell you that he lived off the land when it came to his weapons. So we'd go to a Wendy's and he would get a fork and a knife. Anywhere we went, he was basically taking plasticware or some kind of knick-knack, something that didn't even seem to fit into the world of wrestling. And I'd say, Abby, what are you doing? He goes, just getting some stuff, champ. Some stuff for tonight. And sure enough, you know, he would break
That's amazing.
break out the Wendy's fork or whatever the case might be, and mayhem would ensue.
I mean, as much as people associate like a barbed wire bat with Mick Foley,
Yeah.
This is Stu, who is
Yes.
one of our road field producers, who is kind of my heir apparent, you know, and he's done a tremendous job. And so here's him asking.
If you heard us last season when we did the audio-only version of Unheard,
That's
he
right.
joined us.
He did,
to
that's
talk
right.
about doing
That's
some
right.
of these interviews.
So here's Stu.
they probably associate a fork with Abdullah.
Yeah, Abdullah, the fork was his weapon of choice. But he was too classy a guy to take a fork, a metal fork from a restaurant. That's why when I was around him, he used the plasticware. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's amazing.
Classy of a guy. Too classy of a guy.
I'm taking some gimmicks. I mean, just sourcing on the road.
Did he call him Champ or Chap?
Champ.
Champ?
Champ.
All right, I was hoping it was Chap, but that's fine.
Is Wendy's the quintessential wrestler fast food?
I would think Denny's. If you call that fast
If you,
food.
I don't know if you do.
I don't know. Do you?
I would. Well, it's
But
like,
Jim Cornette loves Wendy's.
Yeah.
I'll say, yeah, you get that. I mean, I think Denny's isn't necessarily fast food. It's
Okay.
like that Applebee's kind of like
Okay.
Yeah, I
sit
wouldn't.
down fast food.
I
but
think Wendy's comes up a lot
It's,
in this
With
show.
Abdul the Butcher? We'll get to that. I mean,
We will.
so much there with Abby, but thanks to Mick for that quick insight into, you know, Abby lets him in. Abdul the Butcher is somebody who is, you know, not necessarily welcoming to everybody in terms of the secrets. So it's great to get that perspective.
Right.
But it comes full circle for Mick because
Yep.
there comes a point where after he's suffered all the trauma we've been talking about, all the bumps and bruises and broken bones and surgeries and whatever else he's had to deal with, he finds himself in a wrestling ring, and there's Abdullah the Butcher, and there's Dusty Rhodes, who of course is just a wild sensation in the business, and
Right.
somebody that kind of had creative control over WCW at the time Mick Foley broke into that organization, and Abdullah the Butcher was there as well. Here are two guys who are sort of like almost 20 years his senior in the business. He's in the ring with them, and Mick is the one who's refereeing,
Yeah.
well,
and they're still wrestling.
When was this?
This was, according to his memory, 2009-ish.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So let's just paint that. Let's just. I mean, we'll get into the clip, but these guys are in their 60s,
Something like that.
right? So you have Dusty Rhodes and Abdullah.
And a pair of jeans and with
Oh,
the,
Yeah,
the knee pads over
With
the
the knee
jeans.
pads over the jeans, that's a real
I do
problem.
like that look.
Dusty, that's a real problem. That's a real problem.
But these guys in their 60s wrestling. But yes, Mick, as we'll see, is he's the retired one who can't
So
perform.
insane.
He's the one looking at these two, and he's sort of like, I can't believe that these giants of the industry who were the kings when I was trying to make my name, they're still going,
Yeah.
such as it is. You know, they're
Yeah.
both walking around the ring, hitting each other in the head with things, but
Well,
but he's there presiding as somebody that isn't an active participant anymore.
You know, in a weird way. I mean, that goes on to that's a celebration of Mick Foley, who's able to kind of, you know, whether or not it was his choice or whatever, move on and, you know, live a different life. Whereas, you know, there are so many guys who get stuck in.
Well, I don't know if
do
it
it.
was by choice though. which
Oh,
we'll
they
find
need
out.
money.
Well, no, true, but
Yeah.
it's still like
Yeah.
it's always
Right.
rough to see guys
Oh, yeah,
whether or
yeah.
not they choose or not. Like if they have to go back to that, that's all they have.
They can't leave it.
They can't leave it.
Right, and
you know?
that's a whole
It's-
separate.
To
Yeah.
payday, they can't pass up.
Right.
And in the case of Dusty Rhodes and Abdul the Butcher, their in-ring styles weren't predicated on these massive risk takes.
That's
Right.
true.
So you can still
Right.
do that in your 60s. You can still walk around and
Yeah.
jab somebody in the
Yeah.
head with something from Wendy's.
You can. You can do that.
Should you?
Should you
Yeah,
is
right.
another
The
question.
Should is
Let's
the
take it
question.
to
All right, let's hear Mick.
Yeah, he could barely walk. I remember I refereed a match between Abdullah and Dusty Rhodes around that time period, and neither guy was moving very well. And I remember thinking, you shouldn't need to be wrestling at this age, but they still had that it factor, and it's a difficult thing to give up. The roar of the crowd, the pop, doing what you love, what you maybe put on this earth to do to entertain in your own unique way. And I wish he had, folded up the tent a few years before that. Because I was the referee in, say, 2008, 2009. And I was 20 years younger than Dusty and 30 years younger than Abdullah, and I was the referee because I could no longer move very well.
Mick Foley. Well, that'll do it for our premiere episode here of Season 2 of Unheard from Dark Side of the Ring. It's been a pleasure being here with you guys, and please don't forget that Dark Side of the Ring returns for the premiere episode, Season 6, coming up Tuesday night, 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Vice TV, where we take a look at Mick Foley's 1998 Hell in a Cell spectacle. And do join us next time on Unheard, where we're going to be delving into the archives of Dark Side of the Ring to unearth some gems from one of the big giants in the history of the business, former WWF champion Bret the Hitman Hart. That's next time on Unheard. That will do it for us for now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys.